Welcome to another edition of Market Impact Insights, your podcast source for business leadership perspectives to help your business grow. Hear from experts in marketing, sales, business strategy, and more with practical advice for business success. Make sure you won't miss the latest episodes by visiting marketimpactnow.com. Now, here's your host, Dan Albaum.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of Market Impact Insights. This podcast is all about furthering that philosophy that in business, it's all about making a positive impact every day. How we do that through our intentional choices of how we lead. Of course, servant leadership is what we are really passionate about. And I am so thrilled to have an incredible advocate and a living, breathing example of the kind of amazing impact that servant leadership can make in a global business. Of course, I'm talking about Howard Behar, and he has a motivational message that's all about inspiring everyone to be a servant leader and to lead with your values first. He's, of course, an accomplished business leader at Starbucks. He's an author, a speaker, a mentor. He's influenced so many people at all stages of their careers and levels and roles. And he's really been shaped by his experiences working at first in his parents' Seattle market. And he was schooled in operations and management and consumer-oriented retail businesses. But he was part of this incredible leadership trio that built the Starbucks brand. And we're talking about growing that business from only 28 stores to over 15,000 stores spanning 5 continents over 21 years. He led the Starbucks domestic business as president of North America, and he was the founding president of Starbucks International. So he has a global perspective. He opened the very first store outside of North America in Japan. So many experiences and so much to learn from Howard. Welcome to Market Impact Insights.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Now, I want to just kind of go back and have you reflect a little bit on this incredible journey that you've had. What originally sparked your passion for leading the growth of a global business like Starbucks?
Well, it was so tiny when I started. I was actually trying to escape corporate life when I went to Starbucks. I thought I'd be this nice little small coffee company. I didn't realize the hunger and the desire that Howard Schultz had to uh, be big time. But once you get there, you fall in love with it, and and you see the opportunity you have before you, and it just kind of grabs you, and that's what happened. It grabbed both Oren and myself, and of course Howard was there, and we went for it.
Yeah. And when you look back on so much that you've accomplished, what has been some of the biggest personal learning that you've taken from that, Howard? And have there been surprises for you along the way?
Oh, it was endless. I think the biggest surprise was how big the opportunity was. When we all of a sudden realized that we could put stores a block apart and they would do well, that was a huge surprise to us, and that really gave us the confidence to grow. But the thing you really learn along the way, companies growing really fast, and you got to be careful that you don't really zoom past your people. Or if you're getting past them, you've got to give them other opportunities where they can bloom and blossom, so to speak. And then you got to hire people that have the skill set to take you to the next level. The other thing, you begin to realize is that in the early days, I knew every store manager by name, and even their kids' names in some instances. And I certainly knew the results of each of the stores. But as we got bigger, I couldn't possibly do it. It was impossible. And so you kind of had to let go of things, and that's what I did. And I realized that my role at Starbucks was really to be the promoter of the culture and the promoter of servant leadership with inside the organization. And I coined this term that we weren't in the coffee business serving people, but we were in the people business serving coffee. And that's what we tried to drive within Starbucks. But it's that understanding that, after a while, it gets big enough to where you don't have control. It's the people. And so you have to trust your people. And, you of course you have to inspect what you expect, but if you trust your people, they want to perform. And, so that's what we did.
Yeah, what you're talking about there too was just you being very much out there, certainly in the early stages of growth, of being out there closest to where the customer interaction was happening. So you're kind of getting your hands dirty, even as a senior leader. You
Oh,
weren't really removed or in some sort of a ivory tower or silo from
no,
it.
no, absolutely not. There was no Ivory Tower, no, no, I was in the stores every day.
Yeah,
Oops.
and again, building those personal relationships. So when you look out at the landscape of leadership today, what are some of the biggest mistakes you continue to see some leaders making when it comes to trying to elevate the performance of their teams?
They blame instead of support. They try to control instead of enable. They don't they don't trust when they should trust. And as I say, they don't let the person who sweeps the floor choose the broom. They want to make every decision. And the truth of the matter is, great leaders aren't about the decisions they make, they're about the questions they ask, which helps them make the decisions. Because if they don't ask the right questions and they don't listen for the answers, then they can't perform and their people won't perform. And so that's what really makes a difference.
Yeah, where do you think that kind of behavior comes from, Howard? Why do you think there's this tendency sometimes to not be able to step back a little bit and give some space, but that need to kind of control? Is there something that's driving that?
Yeah, yeah, it's insecurity. They don't want to make mistakes, and they think they're the only one that has the answer. And so it's that that they have fears about not getting the results they want, so they want to control everything. And the truth of the matter is, they can't. They think they can, but they can't. I found I couldn't control everything. I was in the stores almost every day somewhere in the world making something happen. And so, and I had three questions I would ask every time I went into a store. What do you like about Starbucks? What don't you like about Starbucks? What would you change about Starbucks? I
Yeah,
don't
you
know.
really hit on something there, which is showing the curiosity. And it's kind of a authentic curiosity, but it starts with asking questions and maybe sitting back and doing more listening than talking.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Now, culture is huge. And obviously Starbucks culture was a big thing and, evolving, but driving it into clarity for everyone in the organization. Where do you see that playing a role? What do you think are the key drivers for developing and then sustaining a very healthy culture?
Uh, you know, have to have everybody aligned with the greater purpose of the organization, and everybody has to be aligned with the values of the organization. And there are three things a servant leader needs to do. The first one is to help your people grow as human beings. The second one is help them grow as professionals. And the third one is help them achieve their own personal goals in life.
Yeah. And that's, of course, to help them really do that, you've got to better understand what those goals are that they have
Yeah,
or help them actually evolve those.
yeah. A culture. The question you have to ask yourself is it the culture you want? In essence, are the people aligned with everything that you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it? And then you have to constantly reinforce it. And I talked about two things at Starbucks, the people and the coffee. And the people were always number one. And so that's what I drove home is the idea that we're here to serve. We're here to serve each other first, and then we're here to serve those human beings we call customer. And it's hard to get fired at Starbucks for missing your numbers, but it was easy to get fired for messing with the people. And when you live up to those commitments, that builds a strong culture, a culture of trust and caring.
Yeah, it's very people centered, people focused for sure. And as a leader, did you always feel that you were very much in a fishbowl from the standpoint of people in the organization always watching really closely that your actions and your behaviors were matching up to your words, that there is this really high bar in terms of, and you're always kind of in view.
Absolutely. And you got to be an authentic, vulnerable leader, and that's the only way that you build trust. And yeah, absolutely. They don't people don't care how much you know, they want to know how much you care. And they watch and listen to what you say, and then they expect you to follow up on those things. And if you don't, you break trust.
Yeah. And they probably would call you out on it too, right? If you
Oh,
have that healthy accountability.
yeah, you have to make sure that they are able to do that. That you don't, I've heard of some leaders they do what's called many do town halls or open forum, but they want all the questions before the town hall, and I never believed in that. I wanted it to be an authentic, real conversation and dialogue between myself and the people that worked in the organization, and it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah. Now, as someone who's so passionate and a huge advocate for servant leadership, let's dive in a little bit more there. How do you personally define servant leadership, and why do you think today, given everything that's going on in our world and in hyper competitive business markets, why is it more important today than ever in terms of committing to servant leadership?
Because servant leadership is about serving others at its core. Servant leadership isn't really a leadership model, it's a life model. It's how you treat others, people with kindness. Servant leadership is also about performance, about getting the job done and holding people accountable. And number one, holding yourself accountable for getting the job done. But it's in today's world, the macro world we live in, the political climate we live in, we don't see servant leadership. We see all about me. We see greed and blind ambition, and that's not what makes organizations really work. I mean, at some level it does, but those are controlling organizations, and you certainly don't get the support of all the people when you're trying to control. And so, like I said before, the three pieces of servant leadership are help your people grow as a human being. How do you help them become better human beings? Human beings that understand they're there to serve other human beings. Number two, how do you help them gain the skills that are necessary to do their jobs better? And that means that you got to invest in them. You got to invest in their education. You certainly have to support them, and you have to hold them accountable because performance matters. But on the other hand, you have to when they're struggling with something, you've got to be there to support them. And the third thing is if you help your people achieve what they want out of their lives, then they want to help you, and they want to help your organization. And you know, otherwise you're just trying to manipulate them, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't work over the long haul. And
Yeah.
telling the truth. That I mean, only the truth, man. I have a quote on my office wall. Only the truth sounds like the truth. And in today's world, it's incredible how much lying there's going on, and it's unfortunate, but people believe the lies, and you see it sometimes in companies too. You certainly are seeing it in our country.
Yeah, deception. There's this really destructive aspect of it over time, and it's always seemed to me, Howard, that once that behavior starts happening and there's no consequences, it feels like it snowballs, right? It's almost
Yeah,
contagious where it just
yeah.
takes over.
What I'm worried about is our young people are starting to believe that autocratic style of leadership is the right way. And I don't believe that. That's not how you build an organization, a healthy organization. You can't build it out of fear.
Yeah, you said something a little earlier too about investing in your people's growth and development continuously. And it seems like with the newer generations coming into the professional workforce, let's say Gen Z, for example, the research shows kind of what they're looking for in organizations they join is they are looking for a clear path to just developing themselves. They're not it doesn't seem like it's enough anymore to just say, hey, be thankful. You've got a job, you're getting paid. You might even be paid really well, but that isn't really enough for them. They do seek a little more meaning, a little more
Yeah,
substance.
they absolutely do. They want to connect. They want to know what they're doing matters. And the truth of the matter is, I don't believe that that is new. I know we talk about the different generations, but look, everybody wants to love and be loved. Everybody wants to grow as an individual, as a human being. Everybody wants more for themselves and for their families. Those things haven't changed. And building trust and telling the truth are not new.
They're
And
kind of eternal principles,
yeah, they're
actually.
eternal principles. And it's just what it is. But when you do things that are different than that, what happens? Right? The systems start to break down, trust begins to break down. And what do you have? You have an organization that's dysfunctional. That is our country today. We're a dysfunctional organization.
Yeah. Now, you've been quoted as saying, think like a person of action and act like a person of thought. What's that all about?
Well, there's an inherent conflict, right? When you're in a leadership position, you're making decisions, but you always want to believe that you have thought out, the problem really well or the opportunity really well. And so, I always struggled with maybe I needed to think more about this, but at the end of the day, you've got to act. You have to make something happen, and so you have to act. You can think, but you got to act. So that was always a conundrum for me: is how much information do I really need? How much data do I really need before I make a decision? And I came to the conclusion that sometimes less is more. And so I wanted to become a person of action.
Yeah. And, I've heard other people talk about, this idea that perfectionism or extreme perfectionism can be the ultimate enemy of any progress, right? Because you just basically, you're not embracing the idea that, you know what, it may not be perfect, but I'm going to learn from this. And there's just something good about the motion of making things happen. And you were talking about action, being an action-oriented mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you think about exceptional leaders, Howard, the ones that you've worked with, that you've helped develop, what do you think separated them from the ones that were just good enough?
I think one word would describe them. They were empathetic. The great leaders, they may have been tough as hell. They may have demanding of results. They hold people accountable, but they were always empathetic and they were always kind. You know,
Yeah.
they loved their people. They loved what they were doing and they loved their people.
I think sometimes this idea of being kind gets confused with weakness. I've had conversations with people that say, well, I don't want to be labeled as someone who's a kind leader because I kind of view that as being soft or weak. Nothing could be farther from the truth, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, kindness is still about performance, getting job done, but it's getting the job done not on the backs of your people but with your people. It's your people knowing that you're there to support them. They know that you're going to hold them accountable, but you're not a yeller screamer. You don't put people down, and it makes a huge. It's the same thing that works in families. Exactly. If you come home yelling, screaming, always at your kids or at your significant other or spouse, does that work? No,
Not a great strategy.
no. But if you're kind and you care and they know you love them and you're not abusive, then it works. That doesn't mean that my wife doesn't hold me accountable for the things I commit to, or it doesn't mean I don't hold my kids accountable. I do, but I do it in a loving, caring way.
Yeah. You're really talking about just being good humans.
Yeah, that's all this is. That's all
Yeah.
this is. I'm not saying you can't be an asshole and win. If money is your only objective, you can be a jerk and get all the money in the world. But is that really how you want to live your life? Is that all that really matters? At the end of your day, are you going to be sitting in your rocking chair or your wheelchair, whatever it is, counting your money? Or are you going to be thinking about the friends you made and the
Right.
things you did in your life that supported other people?
Well, the really wonderful thing about all this is that we're talking about something that each of us has the total power of choice. It's about intention and choice. This isn't something that's preordained in
Right.
terms of we can make that choice.
Yeah, exactly. We can choose. We have to live our life with intention. And that means who are we? Who do we want to become? How do we want to do things in our lives? And we have to be clear about that. And then we have to hold ourselves accountable. But it's people don't like the word love in business. But I think love has its place because the people that we work with are human beings and they're worthy of our love. It's not the same love that your familial love that you'll have with your family or your kids or your significant other, but it's love nonetheless.
What's the best piece of business advice that you have ever received?
The single best business piece of business advice that cash is king. Businesses don't go broke because of a P&L statement. They go broke because they run out of cash. And I've seen it happen so many times. Entrepreneurs, they don't raise nearly enough money. They under resource and then when push comes to shove, they don't have the resources to get them through the troubled times.
So, understanding those dynamics and dependencies that impact cash flow
Yeah.
becomes paramount.
Yeah. It's exactly, it really becomes paramount. And it makes such a huge difference of as a leader of how you get things done when you know you got the cash in the bank. Um, you know, the other thing I think is that leaders need to know themselves, right? Really need to know themselves. And somebody, when I was in my mid to late 20s, they said, ask me a question, what are your values? I never thought about what Howard's values were. I was just
Yeah.
Howard being Howard,
Uh-huh.
whatever that was. And that journey I went on to figure out what my values were, how those values inform my actions and my decisions, my own personal mission statement, really made a difference. And that was because somebody pushed me to do that work.
Yeah, I've always felt like your ability as a leader to actually empower other people and put that trust in other people, you've got to start from a really strong base of self-awareness. If you're not there, it's really hard for you to extend that, right? It's kind of
Exactly.
foundational, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's foundational. Know who you are, make sure that everybody understands what your values are and commit to those things.
Howard, when you think about the future, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I think people are inherently good. And I think people inherently want to do the right thing. And so I think that even though we're struggling right now, that we will get through this. The question is when. And so I'm optimistic about that. At the same time, I'm cautious. I worry. I worry about what's going on in our world, and
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I worried about how people are selling their souls for, for monetary gain.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, as we wrap up our conversation, do you have any other final advice for leaders that are looking to create more positive impact and really lift the performance of their teams?
Clear purpose of the organization. That is a must. Why are we here? Why are we all doing this? Why do we come every day and try to make something happen in our organization? The why is more important than the what, but it's clear purpose. This is why we're here, and I think if we get that right, if a leader gets that right and is able to reinforce it and then live by it, that it makes a huge difference.
It almost feels like if you don't have the why really fleshed out, at some point it's like a steam engine or a locomotive or whatever kind of engine. You run out of juice. You run out of steam at some
Yeah,
point.
people don't burn out. They get bored out. And they get bored out because they've lost their connection to the why. And the why is always about serving somebody.
It's all back to servant leadership.
Yeah.
Howard, thanks again for joining, sharing your incredible life example, living and making impact as a servant leader. It's really inspiring.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity.
And a reminder, please continue to give the gift of feedback to help make this podcast even better. You can do that by going out and giving us a rating and a review. It's so easy to do on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And as always, make sure to visit marketimpactnow.com for the latest in business leadership perspectives. So long until next time.